Chapter 25, Diplomacy and World War II. Hello, my name is Herbert Hoover, and my foreign policy was known as isolationism. This policy's goal was essentially to tell all other countries that we wanted nothing to do with them, especially Europe. During my presidency, there was somewhat of an incident in a place called Manchuria. The Japanese defied our open door policy and blatantly disobeyed the League of Nations. They just marched right on in to Manchuria with their troops. After this act of aggression, the League of Nations condemned Japan for its actions. Yeah, that's pretty much all they did, though. League of Nations was taken as a joke from this point on. Hello, my name is Henry Stimson, and I am famous for my Stimson Doctrine. This doctrine declared that the U.S. would not recognize any militaristic regime that was established by force, such as Japan when they invaded Manchuria. Hi, I'm FDR. I didn't have too much time to handle foreign issues, seeing how I was busy dragging this country out of the Great Depression. But my main focus in foreign policy was making sure that our relations with our neighbors were good. After a lot of thought, I decided to call my policy the Good Neighbor Policy. I just wanted to be friendly with our Western Hemisphere buddies, especially in a time of need. With fascism on the rise and our lack of resources, we had to stick together. During our Pan-American conferences, we, the U.S., decided to stay out of Latin American internal affairs. Hey, don't you remember the Roosevelt corollary that I added to the Monroe Doctrine? Oh, shut up, Teddy. I can do what I want. I'm the president. You're dead. I was able to nullify the Platt Amendment so that all we had to control in Cuba was Guantanamo Bay. Good thing Hillary Clinton wasn't here, as she tried to shut down Guantanamo as well. The Mexican government seized our oil land, and instead of helping our U.S. companies get them back, I encouraged them to work it out themselves. During my presidency, I also recognized the Soviet Union so that we could trade with it. I got Congress to pass the Tidings-McDuffie Act in 1934, which led to the Philippines' independence in 1946. It was just too expensive to govern the Philippines. I was also granted extensive executive power to reduce the tariffs in order to increase international trade. Hello, my name is Benito Mussolini. In 1922, I rose to power in Italy as the fascist leader. People were fearing the rise of communism and dissatisfied with their current government, so they followed me. My goal is to form a nation based on strong nationalistic views. Hello, my name is Adolf Hitler. In the 1920s, I rose to power of a fascist party that we called the Nazi Party. And quite the party it is. I attracted unemployed German workers who, along with me, resented the Treaty of Versailles from World War I. We're known best for our bullying of Jews in what we call the Holocaust. Hello? Hello? I am the Emperor of Japan. My plan is to invade China and Southeast Asia in order to secure raw materials that we don't have here in Japan. We don't have these raw materials in Japan like tin and like copper and other natural resources that we want to find in China and Southeast Asia. That is my goal. Hey guys, we could work together and form a team. Something with a cool name. Yeah, but what cool name are we gonna have, Benito? I think a cool name would be the Axis Powers. Yes, I agree. The country of Japan agrees that the name should be Axis Powers. Chapter 25, continued. American isolationists. These were people who feared war in America and did not want us to go to war in World War II. The lesson that we learned from World War I is that we can't let the bankers and manufacturers get greedy and go to war because of this. Neutrality Acts. Neutrality Act of 1935 authorized the President, FDR, to prohibit all arms shipments. The Neutrality Act of 1936 forbade the extension of loans and credits to the belligerents. The Neutrality Act of 1937 forbade the shipment of arms to the opposing sides in the Civil War in Spain. The Civil War in Spain consisted of two sides, the Loyalists and the Fascists. The U.S. favored the Loyalist side because we wanted to do everything we could to eliminate fascism in the world. But due to Neutrality Act 1937, we weren't able to help the Loyalist side. The America First Committee was run by Charles Lindbergh, and in their goal of going around the country and warning the general populace of war. The soon-to-be Allied powers made a lot of appeasements, as in Ethiopia in 1935, when Mussolini marched in with troops and forced out native Ethiopians. The League of Nations really did nothing to help, and neither did the U.S. In the Rhineland in 1936, Hitler marched into an area of Germany, the Rhineland, where he wasn't supposed to be. The Treaty of Versailles specifically said that he wasn't supposed to do that, but we took no action against it when he did. In China, in 1937, there was a full-scale war going on between Japan and China, and a Chinese boat named the Panay was shot down by Japanese aircraft. The Japanese succeeded in shooting down the Panay, and afterwards apologized for their actions, which we took as a good apology. In 1939 to 1941, the soon-to-be Allied powers were handling war very poorly. Great Britain and France basically told Germany that if Germany were to invade Poland, that they would fight back. Hitler took this as a challenge and he invaded Poland. Beforehand, he made a pact with Stalin, a pact of non-aggression, which meant that they weren't going to fight with the Soviet Union while they invaded Poland. Hitler used a method of warfare known as lightning warfare, or Blitzkrieg in German. It was basically a method of going in with powerful, fast attacks. Over here in the US, we had our own domestic policy changes that we need to make. We had the new cash and carry, which was basically a way of staying technically still neutral in the conflict, but favoring the British heavily, because it said that we could provide money for countries that used it directly on their naval forces, which British had a strong navy. So, although staying technically neutral, we heavily favored Britain over the Nazis. We also had a Selective Service Act. In the Civil War, we had a draft. In World War I, we had a draft. But in the peace times of World War II, we decided to have a selective service and no draft. Then there was the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Bombing of Pearl Harbor was what really launched us into the war. We then realized that we did have to go into the war to fight the Japanese, which would mean that we would fight the Germans and the Italians. So the day after Pearl Harbor, which was on December 7th, we decided to declare war. Then Russia invaded the Soviet Union and went against Stalin's pact of de-aggression. So then little did Hitler know that FDR, Churchill, and Stalin had all gathered together as the Allied powers. So now, the US is in World War II. World War II gave the federal government the opportunity to build new federal agencies for war, such as the WPB and the OWM. Business during World War II was truly booming. The business was stimulated by wartime demand, and the U.S. industries took advantage of it. The manufacturing businesses were able to take advantage of the wartime demand and supply weaponry and other materials for war. Another thing that we were working on was the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was working on the atomic bomb, and essentially we wanted our hands on it. Japanese people in America had to face a struggle known as internment camps, where we held them in camps where they weren't allowed to live a regular life. In the election of 1944, FDR was back, and he was running against the Republican Dewey. He won, but then in his fourth term, he died. So Harry Truman was there to replace him. In World War II, we took advancements on the battlefield, and we started bombing German cities. We took the offensive to them, and we were able to get the advantage. And on D-Day, we were able to, with the help of Dwight D. Eisenhower, we were able to storm Normandy and capture the beach, which was a big accomplishment in the war. Truman thought of what we had to do for Japan, and we did have the atomic bomb. So what we decided to do was use our atomic bomb.
So we dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yalta is a place the place where the Allied powers got together to decide what we were going to do with German land. We divided up, not quite like that, but we did divide up German land. The costs of World War II were the cost of any war, lives and money. Now, after World War II, the League of Nations was replaced by something called the United Nations, or the UN. And this time the US was sure to get in on the UN. Now we're on to chapter 26. Chapter 26 is the Cold War, and who better to lead us through the Cold War than Harry Truman? So we start off with the GI Bill. The GI Bill was a way for veterans coming home from wars, World War II in this case. They were able to come home to America and get an education so they can go into the workforce. There was also a period called the baby boom, where a new generation of children were born. This generation of what they call baby boomers were the progressive era, and 1/3 of married women were able to hold jobs. Harry Truman had a big goal of raising the minimum wage in his presidency. Harry Truman, following in FDR's footsteps, wanted to use the executive power that he had. And he did, and he put it to good use when he helped desegregate the school system. Now we have the 18th Congress. The 18th Congress is a Republican Congress. They were able to pass the 22nd Amendment. Election of 1948. Truman ran against the Republican Dewey, who's running for a second time. Truman won with 50% of the popular vote, a very narrow victory, and the Democrats hold the office. Now it's time for Truman's Fair Deal. The Fair Deal focused on using government money, and a lot of it, to make new government programs. But with the Republican Congress, most of these bills were actually rejected. U.S. and Soviet Union relationships were sketchy between the 1920 and 1945. We never really got along because the U.S. was fearing communism and did not want any of it, so we tried to contain them and keep the relationship good but far. Winston Churchill was known for coining the phrase the Iron Curtain, which was used to describe the satellite states that surrounded the Soviet Union. Truman wanted a doctrine named after him, so he did make the Truman Doctrine. This dealt with foreign policy. The Truman Doctrine had one big goal, and that goal was containment. There was a communist revolution going on in Greece, where communists were upset with the government, and they uprose and overthrew the government. And we had to contain that in Greece. In Turkey, there was a river that was controlled, that helped with trade, and the Soviet Union wanted a hold of it. We had to contain that and make sure that they couldn't expand. The Marshall Plan was caused when Truman feared the Western world was being swarmed with communists. This happened after the war, where they were short of food and deep in debt. The Berlin airlift was an operation run where the U.S. flew over Berlin, Germany, and they were able to drop supplies. The people of West Berlin. NATO, North American Treaty Organization, was made up of 10 European nations, US, and Canada. In response to NATO, the Soviets gathered their satellite states and other communist nations to make the Warsaw Pact. The National Security Act. This did a couple things. One of those was centralizing the Department of Defense, and it made two other organizations, one of them being the CIA. Now we had to deal with the atomic bomb or atomic weapons race. This was mainly with the Soviet Union. We were at a constant arms race with them. We had to always make sure that we had the upper hand, which caused the creating of more atomic bombs. The nuclear race was on with the Soviet Union and the US. Now we're into the Korean War. The Korean War started when the northern part of Korea tried to essentially attack the southern part of Korea. Us as the U.S. sided with the southern side, as well as the Allies did. And led by General MacArthur, we were able to basically... Korea was divided. MacArthur and Truman had a little falling through and disagreed in their ways. MacArthur thought that we should take advantage of the opportunity and bomb China, mainland China, while Truman thought that was a terrible idea. And being the president, Truman did win this, and we did not end up bombing China. Now, communism has been shown through the Soviet Union a lot and with their satellite states, and it's come back as the Red Scare Part 2. The general populace is scared of communism, and Truman is too. Now we're on to McCarthyism, a movement started by none other than Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy was from Wisconsin, and essentially his goal in government was to stop the communists in Congress and in government in general. He would make accusations of communists and try to get them kicked out of the U.S. government. Oh yes, and Truman retires. That's the end.